When my father told me he was getting remarried, I nodded, smiled, and pretended it didn't feel like the final chapter closing on the version of life I once knew. It had been 5 years since my mother passed away, and I couldn't blame him for wanting companionship. He was lonely. I saw it in his silences, in the way he wandered the house like a ghost. But when he introduced me to Melissa, I realized this wasn't just someone to share dinners with. She came with a son. His name was Noah, a year younger than me, but taller, quieter. He stood beside Melissa with an expression that mirrored my own confusion. The handshake we shared was cautious, his hand warm but his grip distant, like he wasn't sure if I'd pull him closer or push him away. That was 2 years ago. Now we shared a house. We called each other stepbrother and stepsister like it was a protective spell, as if naming the relationship could keep us from wondering what it meant to live in such close proximity to someone who didn't feel like a sibling. We never said the words with ease. They felt like disclaimers. At first, it was just awkward. Breakfasts were quiet, dinners politely forced. He kept mostly to himself, headphones in, laptop glowing well into the night. But sometimes I'd find him in the kitchen at 2 a.m., shirtless and half asleep, pouring cereal like a ghost caught in a loop. Those moments made it harder to pretend we weren't beginning to notice things we shouldn't. It started small, a shared glance that lasted too long. The way his fingers brushed mine when we both reached for the remote. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that we were just teenagers adjusting to a new family, that the boundaries hadn't settled yet. But that explanation thinned each time we passed each other in the hallway, and neither of us moved fast enough to break eye contact. One rainy Sunday afternoon, when the whole house felt wrapped in fog and silence, I found him sitting on the staircase reading. I hadn't realized he was home. Our eyes met, and something in his gaze made me pause. "What?" I asked, trying to sound annoyed. "Nothing," he replied, but the corner of his mouth lifted like he was hiding something. "You look different when it rains." I blinked. "What does that even mean?" "I don't know," he said, closing his book. "You just do." I didn't reply. I didn't trust my voice to not betray something else. Instead, I went upstairs, but the memory of that exchange clung to me like the scent of rain on skin. Later that night, I caught myself standing outside his door for no good reason, fingers hovering near the doorknob. I walked away before I could knock. That same week, something shifted. Subtle but real. We weren't exactly talking more, but the silences felt charged, no longer neutral. There was an energy there, like static before a storm. It was a Friday night when I found myself curled on the living room couch, half asleep watching a movie I'd seen a dozen times. The rest of the house was asleep. I heard his footsteps before I saw him, barefoot, hair mussed, wearing an oversized hoodie that I think used to be mine. "You're still up?" he asked. "Couldn't sleep." He didn't say anything. Just sat down next to me, closer than he usually did. I could feel the heat of him through the space between us. For a long time, we watched the movie in silence. Then, during a quiet scene, he whispered, "Do you ever think about if things were different?" I turned to look at him. Different how? If we hadn't been made into family. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My heart was thudding in my chest like a warning bell. "You don't have to answer," he said quickly, eyes darting away. Forget I said anything. But I couldn't forget. I stayed awake long after he went back upstairs, the weight of that question pressing into my thoughts. I thought about the way his voice had softened, about the warmth I felt when he was near, about the part of me that wondered too. The next day, I tried to act like nothing had happened. We passed in the hallway. He gave me a nod. I nodded back, but I felt his gaze on me as I walked away. And I didn't hate it. There was something unfolding between us, slow, quiet, and wrapped in a silence too delicate to name. We hadn't done anything wrong. Not yet, but the line between us had already begun to blur, and I wasn't sure if we could, or even wanted to, pull it back into focus. I kept telling myself it was just a phase. A weird, fleeting tension that would pass like teenage moods. But then weeks turned into months, and instead of fading, the feeling grew roots. We were careful, or at least we tried to be. We didn't speak about that night on the couch, but it lingered between us like smoke. I saw it in the way Noah started sitting closer than he used to, how our legs would brush, and neither of us would move away. I saw it in the way he'd pause when I passed by in the hallway, like he was waiting for me to say something, to give him permission. One night, we were both in the kitchen past midnight. I had gone downstairs for water. He was leaning against the counter, scrolling his phone. His hoodie sleeves were pushed up, revealing the faint curve of veins in his forearm, the kind of detail you shouldn't notice when it comes to your stepbrother. He looked up. Our eyes met. "I thought you were asleep," I said. "I was. But I heard you moving." There was a beat of silence. "Did you wait for me?" I asked, only half joking. His expression didn't change. Would it be weird if I said yes? I didn't answer. I just filled my glass, the sound of water louder than it should have been. When I turned back to him, he was closer, 2 steps, maybe 3, and his gaze held a question I didn't want to answer but also couldn't ignore. We stood like that for too long. No one moved. Then he said something that made the air between us turn electric. "I don't see you as my sister. I don't think I ever have." I should have stopped him there. Should have reminded him of what we were, or what we were supposed to be. But all I could think about was the way he said it. Quiet and steady, like a truth he'd been carrying around too long. "I know," I whispered. It was the first time either of us had acknowledged it. And once the words left my mouth, there was no going back. The weeks that followed felt like walking along a cliffside, hearts pounding with every step. We became masters of coded glances, of stolen moments that said too much. He started helping me with laundry, an excuse, I think, to linger in the small room where no one ever came. I'd catch him watching me when I folded clothes, eyes soft, smile playing at his lips like we were sharing a secret. One Sunday morning, our parents decided to take a day trip upstate, leaving us alone in the house. I didn't plan for anything to happen. But the way he looked at me over breakfast, barefoot, messy-haired, wearing that same worn hoodie, I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. We spent the afternoon pretending we were just 2 bored teenagers. Watched TV, made popcorn, scrolled our phones. But every time our shoulders touched, I felt the spark flare again. I couldn't help but wonder, had he felt it first? Or had I? Later, I found him sitting on the back porch, knees pulled up, staring at the late autumn sky. I joined him without saying a word. He spoke first. "You ever wish things were just a little simpler?" "All the time," I replied, pulling my hoodie tighter around me. He nodded. "I think about it a lot, how none of this is wrong, technically, but it still feels like it should be." The honesty in his voice was sharp, vulnerable. I'd never heard him sound like that before. "Do you regret it?" I asked. He turned his head slowly. "What is there to regret if nothing's happened?" But something had. Not in the way you'd find in a movie or a novel. Not yet, but in the way we looked at each other, in the ache that came from knowing you were drawn to someone you were told you couldn't have. Noah reached for my hand that afternoon. He didn't say anything, didn't make a move beyond that simple, deliberate touch. Our fingers laced together like they'd been waiting to. And we just sat there, watching the leaves fall, pretending we weren't unraveling something we might never be able to put back together. We didn't say we were hiding something, but we were. Not from ourselves, at least not anymore. That line between us had long since faded into a memory. But from the world outside our shared walls, we still played the part. Step-siblings. Strangers who shared a roof, not a history. Not a connection that made the space between us feel electric, even when no words were spoken. Things had shifted in quiet ways. It was in how he lingered at the table after dinner, waiting until everyone else left before walking with me to the kitchen. How our hands brushed when we passed the plates, how his fingers would rest on mine just a second too long before pulling away. At night, I could hear his footsteps. He paced sometimes, like he didn't know what to do with all the emotion wound tight inside him. And I understood that feeling. I felt it too. One evening, while our parents were at a dinner party, I found him outside, sitting on the hood of his car, looking up at the stars like they owed him answers. I climbed up next to him without asking. Neither of us spoke for a while. The night was cool, the air clean and full of that quiet stillness that only comes when everything else in life is paused. Then he said, almost too softly, "I used to hate the idea of having a sister." I tilted my head, surprised. Why? Because it felt like something permanent, like a label I didn't get to choose. And then you came along, and I didn't want that label. Not for you. My breath caught. I looked over at him, his profile carved in moonlight, and all I could think was, this doesn't feel like family, not the way people mean it. This felt like something else entirely. "Noah," I began, unsure of where to take it. But then his hand was on mine, just like it had been on the porch that day. Familiar now. Anchoring. "I know it's wrong," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Or at least, it feels like it should be. But I don't care. Not anymore. Neither did I. Not when it was just us." Back inside, we sat on the floor of my room like we used to during those first awkward months, when we barely knew how to talk to each other. Now, the silence felt intimate, not uncomfortable. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and I leaned into the touch before I could stop myself. We didn't kiss. Not then. But the look in his eyes said everything. The soft exhale of breath. The way he watched me like he wanted to remember my face in that exact moment. It was gentle, restrained, yet filled with that impossible pull neither of us had the strength to resist anymore. After that night, everything between us became quieter. Not colder, just more careful. We knew we were on fragile ground, balancing something real in a world that wouldn't see it the way we did. When our parents joked at dinner about how well we were getting along now, I forced a laugh and avoided his eyes. But later, alone in the hallway, he brushed past me on his way upstairs, and his hand grazed my lower back in that silent, secret way that made my heart skip. It was real, and it was getting harder to hide. The days leading up to it were quiet, almost serene, like the world was holding its breath for us. We didn't plan it. It wasn't one of those nights you circle on the calendar, or an hour you expect to remember for the rest of your life. It was just another evening, another moment of pretend normalcy, until it wasn't. I was in the living room, curled up with a blanket and a book, the glow of the lamp spilling across the pages. Rain tapped softly at the windows, a rhythmic hush that filled the silence between the words. Noah came in without knocking, barefoot and damp from the shower. His hair was tousled, sticking up at odd angles, and he was wearing that gray shirt I always thought fit him too well. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me like he always did now, with that unreadable gaze that left something warm and nervous coiled low in my stomach. "You good?" he asked, voice low, almost casual. I nodded. "Yeah, just reading." He sat down on the edge of the couch, not beside me but close. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. I tried to focus on the page in front of me, but the words blurred. I was too aware of him, his nearness, his silence, the quiet weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. "I've been thinking about that night," he said suddenly. I didn't need to ask which one. I looked up slowly, setting the book aside. "Me too." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and for a second I thought he was going to change the subject. But then he turned his head, his eyes finding mine. "I wanted to kiss you that night," he said, voice barely audible. "I wanted to for a long time. I should have been shocked, or scared, but I wasn't. Why didn't you?" I whispered. His eyes searched mine. "Because I wasn't sure if I could come back from it." I swallowed hard. And now I don't want to go back. That was it. He moved closer, slowly, giving me every chance to stop him. But I didn't. I couldn't. My hand reached out before I even realized it, brushing lightly along his jaw, and in that moment the air shifted. The rules we'd followed so carefully slipped through the cracks like grains of sand. When he kissed me, it wasn't urgent or wild. It was careful, deliberate, like he didn't want to scare me away. His lips were soft and warm, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. But then I kissed him back. Everything else vanished. There was only the quiet hum of rain, the thrum of our hearts, the unspoken truth, finally stepping into the light. His hand cupped the back of my neck, fingers trembling slightly, and I felt that same tremble inside myself. When we finally pulled apart, I didn't open my eyes right away. I just stayed there, forehead resting against his, caught in the quiet after the storm. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't be," I replied, my voice barely there. "Please don't be." We sat like that for a long time, not speaking. We didn't need to. Something had changed. Not in a catastrophic, earth-shattering way, but something inside us had realigned. We were closer now, closer than any two people with our labels should have been. But labels didn't feel like enough anymore. That night, he fell asleep beside me on the couch. We didn't do anything else. We just existed, limbs tangled, heartbeats matching. And for the first time in forever, I felt safe. Not in the way families are supposed to feel, but in a way that made me realize how much I'd needed this to be seen, to be chosen, to be his. After that night, everything changed, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in the quiet spaces where real things begin. Our glances became longer, our touches bolder. The tension that used to dance, just out of reach, had settled into something warmer, something that stayed between us like a shared secret only we were allowed to carry. But secrets, no matter how sacred, come with weight. We felt it in the way our parents smiled at us across the dinner table, so proud of how close we'd become. We felt it when friends made casual jokes about how we got along a little too well. They didn't know. Of course they didn't. But their words landed anyway, reminders of how impossible this would be if the truth ever surfaced. Some nights, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long we could keep pretending, wondering what would happen if we stopped. One night, I found him in the garage, fiddling with a box of old photographs. He didn't hear me come in at first. The only light was the small bulb above the workbench, casting a golden glow across his face. "I don't want to keep hiding," I said softly. He turned to me, eyes tired but sure. "Me neither." We stood there in silence, surrounded by memories that weren't ours, in a house that no longer felt like home. And for the first time, I realized how little of this life belonged to us. "I think we need to leave," I said. His brow furrowed. "You mean?" "I mean actually go. Start over. Somewhere no one knows our names or our story. Somewhere we can just be us." He didn't answer right away. Just stared at me like I was something fragile and fierce at once. "Would you really go?" he asked. "With me." "I already chose you," I said. "This would just be the next step." He reached for my hand. His grip was steady. We didn't pack much, just the essentials. A bag each, some money we quietly saved, and the car keys tucked into Noah's jacket pocket. We left a note, simple and honest. "We're okay. Don't try to find us. This is what we need." As we pulled out of the driveway in the early hours of morning, the house loomed behind us, windows still dark, the world still asleep. We didn't look back. There was nothing left for us in that house but questions we'd already answered. The highway stretched out in front of us, endless and full of possibilities. He drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting between us, fingers brushing mine. I turned to look at him, the boy who had once been introduced to me as my stepbrother, now the only person in the world who made sense. "This is crazy," I whispered. "Yeah," he said, grinning. "But it's ours. The sky turned from navy to gray to gold, and we drove toward it, into the light, into the unknown, into the kind of love that people will never understand, but that doesn't make it less real. Some love stories don't fit inside the lines, so we made our own.